It's 2026 and innovation in the racing game space has stagnated quite a bit. The experimental phase of the 5th and 6th console generations, where three-dimensional games really started to blossom, is now over 20 years in the past. These days there's a certain established design language for games. For the most part, you'll know exactly what to expect from many modern racing games. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with knowing exactly what you can expect from a game, it did make the genre overall more predictable over time. In the indie space, we can still occasionally find some gems that try to bring new things to the table. However, often these things boil down to mixing gameplay elements from various other franchises together. So all this begs the question, is it even possible to create something truly unique anymore? Is the stagnation of the racing game genre simply an inevitability? Have we really exhausted all capabilities for what a racing game can be? I've always thought the answer to those questions is no, but I'm not a game developer, so I couldn't exactly prove my point. But with the return of a once-forgotten franchise, maybe I don't need to become a developer after all. Enter Carmageddon Rogue Shift. Alright, now I feel better. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the studio behind Carmageddon Rogue Shift for sponsoring this video and letting me play the game ahead of time. But don't worry, all of my opinions here are still my own. Before we take a closer look at Rogue Shift, let's rewind the clock a little bit. The Carmageddon franchise saw its last release in 2016 with the release of Max Damage, which was released to fairly mixed reception, albeit being a mostly appreciated game by its fanbase. The series always had a fairly rocky history, as it didn't tend to land all that well with reviewers, but was also struck with a series of bans and censorship. This is the main reason why I've never gotten around to trying out any game in the series myself, as pretty much every single game got hit with delayed releases and at times even full-on bans in my home country, Germany. The aforementioned title, Max Damage, is still banned entirely over here, due to it being considered, and I quote, criminally questionable by our Federal Review Board for Harmful Media. Earlier titles, such as the first game, were still released after some time, but heavily censored to the point of being unrecognizable. Pedestrians have been replaced with robots instead, which almost makes the game seem more sci-fi than it really is. But was any of that even justified? I mean, the Grand Theft Auto games came out just fine in Germany, even though they too let you run over innocent pedestrians. Even better, Midnight Club 2 featured the same ability to run over pedestrians with a car, and guess what age rating it received by the German age rating board? 12 and up. Pedestrians screaming and running away as you're mowing them down is apparently just fine for kids when it's done in Midnight Club, but not when it's done in Carmageddon. So what am I missing here? To investigate, I decided to finally play the very first Carmageddon game, the international version that is. Just don't tell on me, please. And while playing, I definitely noticed a few key differences in the portrayal. The most obvious one is the gore factor. Pedestrians turn into red paste, splattering all over the place when run over. But it doesn't stop there. Running over pedestrians is also a way to beat the game. While you can't simply win races, you'll also win automatically once you've removed all of the pedestrians on the map. So there's an actual incentive to become the most homicidal driver by committing more vehicular manslaughter than your opponents, which is likely what caused so much controversy for the series in the past. Games like Grand Theft Auto actively punish you for killing innocent NPCs by driving up your wanted level, whereas Carmageddon rewards you for it. It's because of this that in order to release on the PlayStation 1, they needed to once again change the NPCs to something less human. This time around, they didn't go with robots though, but zombies instead. Something that has stuck with the series even with its newest entry in 2026, finally marking the latest Rogue Shift to be the very first game in the whole franchise to be released uncut and in all major countries. Carmageddon Rogue Shift was a bit of a surprise announcement for most folks. The series was mostly considered dormant after its last release in 2016. People were generally unsure whether a new Carmageddon would even be able to see the light of day, as the series was so closely tied to its controversial history that it was generally considered to be too risky to return. But against all odds, a new game was finally officially unveiled on December 5th, 2025. This time by the fairly new studio 34 Big Things. And with it, they decided to shake things up a bit. The open environments have been swapped for varied closed circuits, cars now carry heavy weaponry, and the rather simple gameplay loop has been swapped out for a roguelite campaign mode. If it isn't obvious enough, Rogue Shift isn't a reboot or a full-on continuation of the original series, but a spin-off instead. While it does take some elements of the original series, such as the apocalyptic setting, car types, and the crowds, it wraps it around a completely different gameplay loop, one that I haven't really seen attempted in a racing game before. In my previous video, I showed off an Assetto Corsa mod that included a small roguelite game mode, and it has easily become my favorite way to play said game. Simple as it may have been, there's something really compelling about a racing game blending together with the genre of roguelites. As someone who has developed a fairly unhealthy relationship with The Binding of Isaac, this is one of the few things I couldn't wait to see done in an official capacity on a fully feature-complete racing game. It would be something I truly couldn't recall seeing before. Not just a marriage between various racing game mechanics, but a dive into a completely new genre of racing games. But could this even work on a gameplay level? How exactly would one even go about creating a racing game roguelite? What would it look like, and would it even be enjoyable? Admittedly, I haven't played a ton of roguelites outside of Isaac, but there are a few aspects I can still point out that make a good roguelite. The first one is thorough randomization. If you're going to be playing through the game multiple times, each run needs to feel different than the last. This can be achieved through random itemization, random encounters, random locations, you name it. You never truly want to know what's coming next. Another point is build customization. Each item or upgrade has certain effects, and in a good roguelite, you want to be rewarded for combining the right ones with one another, instead of just mindlessly picking up whatever gets thrown your way. This is what's known as a synergy, when two or more items work particularly well with one another, or even create new effects altogether. With proper game knowledge, you can go for certain character builds and create a unique experience each time. The final point for me would be unlockables. This seems to be a common misconception for people who haven't played roguelites. Just because your run ends doesn't necessarily mean you've lost all of your progress. Even on a bad run, you'll ideally still have unlocked something new, which can help you out on later runs. This overarching progression that ties all of your runs together, however far they might have gone, is crucial to make you want to go back in for more attempts. And so heading into Carmageddon Rogue Shift, these will be the main aspects I'll be looking for. I will treat this game as I would any other roguelite, and we'll see if it can tie its core elements into a racing game package. To start, you'll be thrown into somewhat of a tutorial race. This is where you can learn the basic controls of the game and familiarize yourself with the racing mechanics. For one, you'll have a boost that gradually refills as you do various actions. The most reliable one is running over zombies, As they're scattered all over the track, they aren't exactly hard to miss. Occasionally you might even find zombies in smaller clusters or in hordes, in which case it's not a bad idea to leave the racing line in order to get more boost. Other ways to earn boost include performing various actions with your car, such as drifting, jumps, and even wall riding if the track allows for it. Lastly, you could cause damage to other vehicles or special zombies to refill your boost. Outside of the basic zombies scattered across each track, you may also run into more dangerous ones, such as the Boomer, who will try to charge at you and explode, causing damage to your vehicle. However, taking them out before they get close to you not only preserves your vehicle health, but also grants you a bit of boost recovery. There will be more enemy types later on as we go, but this is all that you really need to know as far as the basics go. Basically, go fast, destroy everything, and preserve health. After you finish the tutorial, you'll be able to check all abilities and items you're starting with. It's not a whole lot, just one basic all-rounder car, a handful of abilities, and 3 weapons. The most noteworthy ability you'll always have on you permanently is the Side Bash, a powerful melee attack you can use when side to side with an opponent, where you bash your car into theirs. What the game doesn't explicitly tell you, but is actually incredibly important, is that you can also use the Side Bash defensively. You'll always be able to see when an opponent has you in their crosshairs, and a well-timed Side Bash lets you completely evade most weapons, entirely negating any damage. Weapons play a big role in how each run turns out, and there's a surprisingly high variety of weapons to find here, each with distinctive strengths and drawbacks. Later on you'll also be able to unlock weapon variants, which change the way each weapon behaves, and can turn an absolutely terrible weapon into one that melts through enemy health bars. Each car always has one weapon pre-equipped, but can be swapped out later with another one if you so choose. Our starter car, the Eagle GT, starts out with a fairly basic machine gun. Every car also starts out with a unique skill. In this case, we get a free boost refill should we need to reset our car at any point. This, along with the performance stats, make each car feel like its own character. Do you want to start a run as a glass cannon type character, with a fast and destructive, albeit small and fragile vehicle? Or more of a tank with great defensive capabilities, but slow overall speed? It's really up to you and which playstyle you consider to be most effective. And you can transform these basic builds into something completely different with wacky upgrade synergies later on. So for example, on my second run, I managed to build something like a self-sufficient healing tank that was able to take a lot of damage, while also being able to replenish its health entirely on its own. Upgrades that sound absolutely terrible and borderline detrimental on paper can actually be insanely game-breaking with the right setup. In which case, this game already ticks one of the major boxes for what makes a good roguelite. While it's not necessarily as expansive as other roguelites that have been honed and updated throughout the years, but the fundamentals of finding good builds and creating synergies are absolutely present in Rogueshift. Synergies can even be more explicit, where certain upgrades will be granted a bonus if certain other upgrades are already on the car. You'll encounter this fairly easily on your first run, where you'll get a flat damage boost with your starting set of upgrades. With your starter car, you can then start your first run, where you'll be promptly thrown onto the map. The idea is that each time you start a run, you'll participate in a Carmageddon that starts at the end of a day, where it's your goal to survive all the way until the break of dawn. How you get there is entirely up to you, as you'll be able to freely choose which path to take to the next event. This may also require some pre-planning and looking ahead on the map. Checking where certain shops are, which races are likely to cause more headaches, and what the best path forward is without getting wrecked. Without proper pre-planning, it's surprisingly easy to completely lock yourself out of important upgrades, especially in the later stages where you can take a dozen different approaches. This is something you'll always need to do each run, as the map gets randomized as soon as you start a new Carmageddon. This means that races will always be different and take place in different locales, Shops are located in different parts of the map, while also carrying different inventory each time. Previously accessible paths may now not connect anymore, and event types also get shuffled around. To that extent, I think Rogue Shift succeeds in delivering a fresh experience each time. While you'll probably start to recognize tracks after a while, and upgrades will probably reappear as well, each run is usually different enough than the last one you just had. Especially given that you gotta take whatever you can get as far as upgrades go in the early game. Now without further ado, let's head into our first proper race. You're still in the first stage, where you should have little problem getting ahead of other opponents or destroying them outright, even with your basic arsenal. What you'll quickly notice is that, other than your regular opponents trying to beat you to the finish line, enforcers will also join the race. They're basically just like regular cops you might have seen in other racing games, trying to break up the race and get you to stop. Thankfully, they're considerably easier to damage than the other opponents, though they also arrive in bulkier and harder to destroy cars later on. Though for now they don't pose a major threat and can be mostly ignored. At this stage I would rather save what limited ammo you have to get ahead of your opponents. You may also run into the aforementioned boomer zombies here, and thankfully special zombies can also damage other enforcers, occasionally taking each other out in the process. If you manage to make it to the top 3 in one piece, you'll be able to continue the Carmageddon. If you don't, then it's game over. Yes, there's actually no way to restart a race and try again, at least on the regular difficulty mode. By default, getting your health down to 0 or not completing the race objective will end the run, meaning you'll need to start over from the beginning. Later on you'll get the chance to obtain golden tickets, which will either allow you to respawn once per ticket or skip an event outright. But they are among the rarest resources in the whole game. On easy mode you can restart races without limits like in a regular racing game, though I would advise not enabling it, or at least not using the restart feature, as it would render the entire roguelite aspect completely meaningless. Plus, you'd make your life way harder by attempting to beat the later stages without any permanent upgrades. So take my advice, just take the L and go again. Each time you successfully finish a race, however, you're granted some credits depending on your performance in the race. Your final position, whether you completed any optional objectives, how many zombies you've slain, and other car-related actions factor into your final payout. Any earned credits can then be exchanged for new upgrades, weapons, and extra repairs later on. And you should make use of them, as any credits you've accumulated disappear when your run ends. Other than credits, you'll also be earning beat coins. And I want to stress this, it's beat coins, not bitcoins. We're not collecting garbage cryptocurrencies here. These you'll not be able to spend right away, but they are your gateway to unlock new upgrades, especially permanent ones, but also new cars and weapons in between runs. There's nothing you can really do to affect how many of these you earn in a given race, like with the regular credits, but you do earn more of these the further you go. It's also worth noting that any damage you've accumulated on the car persists in between races and doesn't get repaired automatically. So it's wise to collect any repair pickups left on the track if there are any. In general, health is probably the most important resource in the entire game, and also the hardest to maintain. You should always earn enough credits throughout a run to buy whatever upgrades you need, but health is incredibly easy to lose and even harder to recover if you're not careful. While there are repair pickups scattered on the track, they don't magically reappear after a few seconds like in a standard game of Mario Kart, but instead disappear for the remainder of the race once picked up. As such, it might be wise to not collect too many at once if you've just taken a smidgen of damage, but keep them for when you really need a repair. This becomes especially relevant when you've run out of health, as there is a 10-second grace period before your car explodes and your run ends. Within those 10 seconds, if you manage to pick up a repair marker just in time, you'll be able to continue and attempt a comeback. With that in mind, you'll never want to run through all pickups in a single spot, but keep at least one of them there in case you desperately need a last-second revive. unless you're on the final lap and can work on recovering as much lost health as possible to put yourself in a safer position on the next event. So you've made it through your first race, and usually after that you'll get the chance to spend your credits on your first upgrade in a workshop. Here you can add various upgrades to your loadout, or improve existing ones if you find a better version of one you already own. For now you can only carry up to 3 upgrades at once, with one slot already being used up by the unique skill the car came equipped with. As such, you'll need to make sure that the few upgrades you can put on the car synergize with each other in a meaningful way. You don't want to slap a bunch of random stuff into your loadout in hopes of covering all bases, but instead try to come up with a certain build that makes use of all the randomly offered upgrades you were able to obtain. On your first run, this is still less of a concern than later, as the workshop only offers a few fairly basic upgrades at once. So for now I went with a simple ranged combat kit, which gave me an extra 10% weapon damage, but could give me an extra 40% damage if I buy the collision kit that was also on offer, which will then also receive a boost in damage. This is one of the first fairly basic and also explicitly stated synergies you can get, but synergies can also reach far beyond basic stat increases later. Moving back to the map, I now got to choose between 2 events. There's no way to go back and do any previous races. You'll constantly need to be moving forwards on the map. Which is why I explained the importance of mapping out a route ahead of time earlier. In these cases, where you need to decide between 2 or more events, it's also worth looking at these secondary objectives. Depending on your car, these may either be incredibly easy or close to impossible to achieve, and will net you a decent credit bonus if done successfully. This is where the decision making gets into play here. Do you want to do an easy event with potentially better payouts, but give up on the opportunity to upgrade your car later? Or try to go for something a bit riskier, but with an extra shop on the way? Considering the map is shuffled and randomized each time, with the exception of the general size and location of boss battles, you'll run into these decision-making situations fairly frequently, especially with the introduction of elite races later on. These are harder, more demanding races than the usual ones. Outside of opponents being faster and dealing more damage, it's also not enough to finish in the top 3 anymore. A first place finish is required in order to move on, however the credit rewards are doubled for beating them. If you run into one of these in the early game, there's no need to panic, as these only really become risky during the later stages, so they're usually worth going for if you're just starting a run. After finishing a handful of races, you'll probably run into the weapon dealer, where you'll have the ability to either upgrade your existing weapon or switch to a different one. I mentioned previously that the weapons play very differently and have their own strengths and weaknesses, but you can play into a weapon's strengths using the right upgrades. In general, you'll want to either pick a weapon that works well with your current loadout, or build a loadout that favors a certain type of weapon. So for example, one of the upgrades you can acquire later makes it so that the final bullet in your chamber does exceedingly more damage. With that in mind, something like a machine gun which shoots many bullets of lower damage would work pretty badly with this upgrade. But something like a missile launcher which doesn't have a lot of ammo but does high damage will benefit greatly from it. You'll be needing to work with what you can get in the early game, and that also means switching to a weapon that better favors your current setup. As you can probably see right now, all of these different upgrades can either synergize incredibly well or terribly with each other. And navigating what works and what doesn't work is mainly what will decide how far you can make it. So for now, to experiment with different weapons, I decided to switch to a missile launcher which does considerably more damage than the machine gun, but has noticeably less ammo and a higher reload time, as well as a slower lock-on. Considering I had a boss fight coming up, it seemed like a better pick. Which brings us to the boss fights. These are basically what gatekeeps you from accessing later stages in the Carmageddon. The first one is the Berserker, and he's fairly straightforward. Boss fights in general play quite a bit differently than the other events, as there is no set finish line in place. The event continues until either you or the boss dies, or if the timer in the top right corner expires. This changes the dynamic of the event quite a lot. Whereas you'll want to play fairly aggressively in the standard races to stay ahead, in boss battles it may be wise to play more defensively at times. Bosses have considerably more health than your standard opponents, so you'll want to be focusing your firepower on the boss instead of the random goons that accompany them. Bosses generally have more ways to defend themselves, for example by dropping explosive barrels behind them or firing off flamethrowers on the sides. Since these fights can take a bit longer than most races, you'll probably begin to run out of health, at which point falling back and waiting to reach repair pickups is a wise move. Though keep in mind that repairs are fairly limited here as well, arguably even more so than in regular events. In general, boss fights act more as a damage check, to see if you're able to output enough damage to defeat the boss before the timer runs out. Especially since you'll want to primarily rely on your ranged weapons for safety reasons, unless you're going for the kill, in which case you can attempt a quick side bash to finish them off. Once you've beaten a boss, the next stage opens up, which reveals more of the map. You'll also get the chance to fix up your car at a mechanic, though for a price if you want to fully restore your health. I usually would try to ignore mechanics as much as you can afford, as there'll usually be plenty of opportunities to repair your car on the next event. But on the flip side, they do sell golden tickets on later runs, which can be an absolute lifesaver if you get really unlucky during a race. So carrying at least one at all times is a smart idea. The second stage is where things begin to really kick into gear for any run, as all events get noticeably harder and you'll need to be making early decisions for which path to take on the map, because you're not going to be able to reach every shop this time. In stage 2 you'll also likely encounter more enemy types, such as the spitters that shoot toxic liquids onto the track you'll need to be avoiding. Enforcers will also up their arsenal with heavier vehicles that can drop explosives behind them. Also in stage 2 you may run into a scavenger hunt, which are basically the most high risk and high reward way to gain upgrades and other goodies. You'll need to decide which out of 6 shipping containers you want to open. You can open as many of them as you like, but there is a catch. 5 of them can carry either money, Bitcoin, or even extremely valuable upgrades and weapons, oftentimes being 2 whole levels above your current equipment. And that's entirely for free, mind you. However, one of the containers has zombies in it, which upon opening not only kicks you out of the scavenger hunt, but also makes you lose all upgrades and currency you've managed to collect so far. So basically, it's gambling core at its absolute finest. On my first attempt at this, not knowing yet how exactly these work, I actually managed to open all 5 shipping containers that had loot inside of them. Only to then open the last one, not realizing I would lose everything if I opened it. The greed has truly consumed my entire being. Regardless though, I would always shoot for the scavenger hunts whenever you can. Sure, you could roll the occasional 1 in 6 and get absolutely scammed, leaving with nothing. But generally the free high tier upgrades are always worth the risk. My recommendation would be to open containers until you find one new upgrade or weapon, then leave right away to bank what you got. If you only got a bit of currency or a repair and then trigger the zombies, it's not really a huge loss. But you don't want to leave the upgrades on the table. The second stage also features new event types, such as Survival, which is essentially a time trial event with extra enforcers and zombies. Generally these are pretty simple and a great way to replenish some car health for free, as enforcers don't use typical weapons like you or other opponents do. The main issue with these is the time limit, and I would avoid these events if you're using a slower vehicle, as it was exactly what ended my second run that was really promising up to that point. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm still not over that one. Either way, with some luck you may survive the second stage on your first run, at which point you'll reach your second boss battle against Chief Biggin and Wastehead. Yes, this is actually a tag team battle, except you have no tag team. And since there are now 2 bosses, they also take roughly twice as much to take down. The best strat is to focus on Biggin first, as his explosives are much more dangerous here, needing you to keep track of his positioning throughout the entire fight. After you've taken care of him, you can focus on unloading your weapon on Wastehead, and hopefully you'll be able to take them both out before either the time runs out or you'll run out of repairs. With their destruction, you'll successfully move on to stage 3, which is likely where your first run will end. But that doesn't need to necessarily be a bad thing, as the game starts to really open up with your second run. Over the course of the events, you've likely accumulated loads of Bitcoin, which you can finally start spending in the black market. You might also have unlocked an achievement or two, which will also give you more currency or new special upgrades to buy in shops. The main thing to buy here are new vehicles, weapons, and especially permanent upgrades. The first two are self-explanatory, though permanent upgrades are always worth picking up regardless, as they are always useful and will increase your chances of going further on your next run. As for cars and weapons, generally speaking, you'll mainly want to unlock only those you actually intend on using. Same goes for new shop items. While every upgrade can have its use, some are simply easier to make use of than others. Though keep in mind you'll need to be spending a certain amount of Bitcoin in order to unlock more pages of the black market. So try buying upgrades that make sense to you, or where you'll think you can combine them well with others. If you've spent it all, you can take another shot at the Carmageddon and start a second run. This is where the game will really start to open up, and I would suggest anyone interested in the game to at least play up until this point. You'll have way more possibilities for synergies, more weapons to experiment with, and can go for an actual build. I won't run you through my second run in its entirety like with the first, but I started with a clunker, which trades some speed for a lot more durability. It starts with a shotgun and a skill that increases my damage the higher my defense stat is. Now I'll be honest, without any further upgrades in the loadout, the clunker is quite hard to make use of. The shotgun is really only effective at close range, which is bad since it's hard to get close to anyone with the car's low acceleration. So how did I make this car work then? Early on I picked up the conversion upgrade, which removes all repair pickups on every track, but therefore my HP gets recovered through special actions, such as drifting or running over zombies. This gave me a great idea. What if I could build a self-healing tank? So I started to look for more upgrades to increase my defenses, so that I could out-heal any damage just by driving over clusters of zombies. This worked so well in stage 1 that I ended most races with full health. Thanks to the clunker's special skill, I'll also be dealing more damage with each defense upgrade, at which point the shotgun actually became usable even on longer ranges. Eventually I also picked up a variant of the shotgun. Weapon variants are basically modified versions of existing weapons, focusing on certain traits or changing the way they work entirely. For the shotgun, I found a variant that removes the lock-on, so I'd have to use a crosshair and move the car in order to aim. The benefit was being able to deal about twice as much damage, and while manual aiming would usually be difficult with weapons such as the missile launcher, it seemed easy to pull off with shotguns since I'd need to be in close range anyways to deal maximum damage. Eventually in stage 2 I found another special upgrade that gives me an extra 2% maximum HP with every wrecked opponent, at the cost of getting significantly less HP from repair pickups. But since we already removed all of the repair pickups anyway in favor of alternative healing, this just turned into a flat upgrade with absolutely no trade-off. It's essentially a perfect synergy that allows me to stock up on more and more defense and HP, while still being able to heal regardless and output more damage. Eventually I also switched to a new weapon, the Stinger, which fires several small sticky grenades ahead of you. For regular races, the shotgun was definitely more beneficial, but if you can land all grenades on a car, it does more damage than anything else I've seen so far. It absolutely melted through boss HP like it was nothing. So, sounds like a perfect build, right? Unfortunately, there's one thing that I neglected, and it's arguably the most important thing in any racing game. Speed. The car was abysmally slow, which usually wasn't a problem since I could destroy anything that comes my way, but entering a survival event eventually lost me the run as I barely timed out in front of the finish line. And that's the beauty of roguelites. Every run, you learn something new. Find one new avenue to improve and focus on for the next run. No doubt that there will also be an opportunity or two for full-on game breaks. Earlier in the video I outlined 3 things of roguelites that are important to me. Randomization, synergies, and unlockables. While not necessarily acing all 3 of these aspects, Carmageddon Rogue Shifts inherits all of them to some degree. You got randomization in the form of tracks, shops and events being randomized each time. You got great potential for synergies and running unique builds. And you got an overarching progression with permanent upgrades and unlockables to use for your next run. It really is a full-fledged racing game roguelite. And the first of its kind, at least to my knowledge. And as you may have guessed by now, I honestly had a great time with it. While there were some things I wasn't super keen on, for one I think the handling could have been a tad more precise, and I'm not sure if redoing the same boss battles will still be engaging long term, I think there's a lot of good here that I haven't even mentioned yet. The track design is genuinely great, with each one feeling very distinct and detailed. I really enjoy the overall vibe of the game. It's pretty rare to see grimy, more edgy racing games in a time where everything feels so sanitized. And I appreciate it for it. Wrecking other cars is incredibly satisfying due to the explosions feeling really impactful, thanks to the added slow motion and punchy audio. The game also ran surprisingly well. I noticed little to no stutters, and it even ran reasonably well on my Steam Deck. It wouldn't be my preferred way to play the game, as we're looking at 30 to 40 FPS here at low to medium settings, although it still looks and plays quite well in person. In the future I'd like to see some improvements to the handling model, as well as maybe some visual changes to the car as you apply upgrades to your loadout. I think this is always a fun thing about some roguelites, seeing your character change as you pick up items, and having your car look different over time would make the progression over a run feel a lot more satisfying. So all in all, I was very positively surprised with Carmageddon Rogue Shift. For a game that came out of nowhere and was a spin-off of a mostly dormant franchise up to that point, I really enjoyed it more than I thought. If you're interested in the game yourself and want to know what the late game looks like, you can find a link to the game in the description below. Thank you once again to 34 Big Things for sponsoring this video, but I hope it came across that I genuinely enjoyed this game as an avid roguelite fan. If you've followed my channel for a while, you'll know that I always love to see racing games attempt new things. And a roguelite racing game is something that I've been wanting to see for such a long time. Thank you also to all of my channel members you can see scrolling by. Consider leaving a like if you found this video fun or helpful, and subscribe if you want to hear me yap about more exciting racing games. And with that, I hope you'll have an awesome day. Take care everyone.